I haven't always lived in Hollow's End. Like a lot of folks, I'm a transplant who arrived here looking for a quiet place to settle down. I was looking for somewhere off the grid, and this town is as far off the grid as you can get. When I got here, though, I realized quickly that this town isn't just isolated and strange. It's downright one of a kind. It changes you. And once you've lived here, there's no going back. Once this place has its hooks in you, you aren't allowed to leave. But I've made the most of it. In my line of work, landscaping, it doesn't matter too much where you live. You can always find customers. Everybody needs their grass cut, their bushes trimmed, their trees planted and pruned. And some folks can't do it for themselves. Or they have the extra cash lying around to avoid getting their hands dirty. I don't judge. If not for them, I wouldn't have a job. And I do like my job. Most days, anyways. Lately, things have gotten a tad bit more tricky. And in Hollow's End, tricky means terrifying, usually. Where do I even begin? I suppose it would have to be with the holes. They started popping up a few weeks ago. At first, I thought they were from gophers or snakes. Maybe even the giant millipedes, which are specific to this town. But the more I started seeing them, the more I began to suspect something sinister. I was over at the Underwood house on Elm, cutting their lawn, when I almost stepped in one. It was the third such hole I'd seen that day, and I probably wouldn't have taken much notice if I hadn't almost put my foot in it. As it was, just my heel caught the lip of the hole, and it caused it to widen further and almost sent me reeling backwards. But I caught myself at the last second and shifted my weight to avoid falling. If not for the extra weight of the lawnmower in my hands, who knew what could have happened? But it worked as an anchor to keep me grounded. Looking back at the hole in the grass, I was struck by how dark it was beneath the ground. It looked like that hole just went on forever. And then, and this might have just been my imagination, but as I started up my lawnmower again, I could have sworn I heard a deep voice talking from down in that hole. Somebody saying something real persuasive-like. Of course, it could have just been my mind playing tricks on me. I didn't even tell Roe Underwood about the hole, now that I think back to it. I was just writing it off as a gopher hole still, or a snake hole, like I said before. But it didn't take long before I realized there was something a lot worse than snakes slithering around under the grass on Elm Street. 2 days later was when the custom orders started coming in. People asked me to fabricate decorations or utility items for their backyards and houses, since I have a talent in those types of things. And I started getting requests for a very specific type of device. "Can you make me a well cover?" Clove Zenoia Harris asked me that morning. It was a peculiar question, since the Zenoia Harris home did not have a well on their property. "What do you need that for, if you don't mind me asking?" I said, while making note of their request on a pad beside the phone. "There's a big-ass hole in my backyard all of a sudden," they said, and my heart skipped a beat. There were a lot of big-ass holes populating the town all of a sudden. And by that, I didn't mean the hipsters, tourists, and early-onset gentrification. "Is it really dark inside the hole?" I asked. "Like, pitch black?" "Yeah, how'd you know?" "Just a hunch." "Okay, I can put something together. Can you give me a rough estimate of its dimensions?" Clove told me, and I made something to cover the hole. Later that day, when I was installing it, I tried to ignore the fact that the darkness of the hole made it look like the ground beneath my feet was inches thin, and incapable of supporting my weight. Such a thing was impossible, which in this town meant it was probable. And I didn't want to think too hard about it, because I was worried if I did, it would cause some sort of existential reaction and result in the ground crumbling beneath my feet. The ground didn't crumble, though, and I got paid handsomely for my efforts. Word got around, and pretty soon half my house calls were to seal off these pesky new portals into nothingness. I had to hire a kid to cut the grass at most of my houses, since I was now so busy building well covers for wells that didn't exist. Which is where things started getting a little more tricky. And again, when people say tricky in this town, They mean terrifying. The kid I'd hired to cut the grass, his name was Matthew, and he was actually 17 and not really a kid anymore, had not been seen for a full day when his parents reported him missing to the sheriff. They did call me first, and I confirmed that I hadn't seen him, and just thought he was playing hooky that day. His parents said the same, and thought he'd stayed out late with friends the night before. It wasn't the first time he'd skipped work, and it wasn't the first time he'd stayed out all night, so people weren't quick to notice his absence. 17-year-olds are not always the most reliable, but I'll take what I can get in this economy. Deputy Randy gave me a call a little while later and even paid me a visit, since I'd been one of the last people to see Matthew alive. It was during our talk that the subject of the holes came up, and we both seemed to realize at the same time what this could mean. "Have you seen anything strange or out of place recently?" he asked me, taking a sip of his coffee. Coffee that had a faint smell of whiskey wafting from it. "Anything at all?" "Aside from the usual strangeness?" I asked, raising my right eyebrow in response. "Well, yeah, of course. Aside from the usual strangeness." He took another sip of coffee and smacked his lips. "Well, there are the holes." "The holes? What kind of holes? You're not talking about the tourists and hipsters again, are you?" "No, not those assholes. Like, actual holes in the ground." Oh yeah, I've seen a few of those too. Florida man Luke called the office yesterday because he thought his dog fell down one of them. Turned out it was hiding under the damn bed." "Yeah, those holes. Frickin' things have been popping up all over town recently." When did you first start noticing them?" "Past couple of weeks, I'd say. They started off small, but they've been getting bigger and bigger. I started getting custom orders to cover them up. I've been fabricating these things like well covers, but they fasten to the ground. Damn things are everywhere. I almost fell into one over at the Underwood." I stopped speaking the instant I realized what had probably happened to Matthew. "Oh, shit. Have you talked to any of my clients yet? The ones where he was supposed to be working yesterday?" "Nope, not yet. I was going to get a list from you and go knocking on doors right after this." My mind was racing as I stood up and began to pace back and forth in my living room. "What? What is it?" Randy asked, standing up himself. "You don't really think you fell into one of those holes, do you?" He might have. And they look deep. I don't know where they lead to. You know the crazy shit that happens in this town. Not to mention the woods. Do you think it's... I don't know what to think yet. But I know one thing. We need to start checking those houses right now. Let's go. You gonna come with me and show me where they are? It'll be faster that way." I agreed without a second thought. I felt responsible for this mess now. If I had noticed Matthew was missing sooner, if I just called him to check in with him the day prior, a million thoughts were rushing through my head, and I had to clear them to focus on the task at hand. Pulling out my phone, I looked up the client list from the day prior. Instead of giving the deputy the first house on the list, I decided on one more likely culprit. The Henderson house was overgrown and neglected. A family member had passed away, and the house was now unoccupied. I'd been hired recently to get the lawn mowed, and to try to fix up the front and back to make it look more presentable to realtors. The long grass would hide a big hole like the ones we've been seeing recently. Not to mention that no one would notice the half-mowed lawn, or the fact that the person mowing it had disappeared mid-job, because the house was unoccupied. "Head over to 32 West 5th Street, I said, and listed off the reasons why it had risen to the top of my list. "Good thinking," Randy said, stepping on the gas. "Hopefully you're wrong about this and the kid's just out with friends, knocking over mailboxes at the edge of town or throwing piss-filled water balloons at tourists." "I hope you're right," I said, crossing my fingers. "I really do." As we pulled up to the house, a first glimpse into the backyard revealed the scene exactly as I'd imagined it. The kid's bike was locked up in front of the home, and I could see the lawnmower in back, sitting in the middle of a half-mowed lawn. All the signs to indicate the worst-case scenario had happened. "Shit," Randy muttered, picking up his pace to match my own. "Looks like you called it, man." "Unfortunately." I slowed my pace as we approached the gaping hole in the grass. By all appearances, it had opened up like a sinkhole beneath his feet right after the kid had passed over it. The black void beneath the grass had no hint of light or any edge beneath the dirt. It looked like the grass was growing on nothing but a dark void. "What the hell?" Deputy Randy muttered, noticing this phenomenon at the same time as me. "Do you see that?" "Yeah, it's like there's nothing holding up the ground. Do you think it's safe standing here?" We both took an involuntary step backwards. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, a voice spoke from the black abyss, calling out to us timidly. "Hello?" It sounded close. And more importantly, it sounded like Matthew. Mostly. We were both too stunned to respond for a few long seconds. And then, the voice came again. "Hello? Is anyone there? I fell down this hole and I can't get back out." Again, his voice sounded like Matthew. But there was something slightly off about it. Probably just an echo, I told myself. "We're here," Deputy Randy yelled back. And that kicked me into action. "We're gonna get you out of there," I called out, ignoring that paranoid voice in my mind which said something was wrong about all of this. "Just hang on." I rushed forward, no longer thinking about the ground collapsing beneath my feet. As strange as it was, these holes always seemed fairly stable once they appeared. None of them had collapsed on me yet. Still, I felt a little bit like I was stepping onto the surface of a barely frozen lake in early winter as I approached the edge of the dark abyss. I got down on my belly, hoping I could see something by looking over the edge, but there was only blackness. "How far down are you?" I called out. "Not far," he answered back. "It's not as deep as it looks. You should come down here too." What the hell? Why would he say that? His voice was creeping me out. Maybe he just hit his head or something. We might need a rope," I yelled to Randy. "Do you have one in your car?" "I do," he said, running off back towards his cruiser. "I always keep one handy for situations such as these." "You don't need a rope," Matthew called out calmly. "If you reach down with your hand, I can grab on. You can pull me out. It's not deep." The hairs on the back of my neck were standing up, and I had a sinking feeling in my gut. Queasy, I heard myself say back to him, "Okay, I'll reach down and pull you out." I didn't want to, but I felt myself doing it anyway. Something about this was wrong, and what he said next didn't help. "Are you sure you don't want to come down here first? There are shiny things down here. Glittery things. Gold. Diamonds." The way he spoke wasn't scared or excited, but quietly convincing. He sounded like the snake trying to convince Eve how tasty apples were. Like a visitor in the desert on the 40th day of fasting. "We can look down there more later," I said, still thinking head injury. "Just grab my hand, I'll pull you up." "Okay." I reached down into the darkness, until I was in up to my shoulder. "Do you see my hand?" I called out. And in that instant, I felt something grab me. Matthew gripped my forearm forcefully, his fingernails digging into my flesh and tearing it. Warm blood was running down my arm and into my hand a second later, making it slippery when I tried to grab him. I felt something else take hold of my shirt collar, too. His other hand, I assumed at first. But then there was another, and another, grasping weakly like a child. All of these hands tried to haul me down into the dark abyss, with varying levels of strength. And they succeeded. I felt my upper body, and then my legs, falling down into the dark hole. I heard myself screaming, the loud sound echoing around in this new, dark place where I would surely die. But at the last second, someone grabbed my ankles. It was Deputy Randy, I realized. And he was the only one keeping me from being dragged under. And then there was another person pulling on me from behind, trying to help the deputy. I could feel their additional strength added to his, and with their help, we were both pulled out from the darkness. I was scared shitless, and felt angry at Matthew for trying to drag me down there. But that anger only lasted for a few moments, as I saw the performance he was putting on. He was hyperventilating and acting scared, as if he hadn't just tried to drag me down there, as if he hadn't been trying to convince me to go down there. It was so dark down there. I could have sworn
I heard things moving around and rustling and...
He was crying now, his face covered in grime and filth. Son of a bitch is putting on a hell of a show, I whispered to Deputy Randy, but I only got an angry glare in return. His response surprised me. I had always known Randy to be the happy-go-lucky, doesn't-give-a-shit, half-drunken deputy, but he snapped at me and caused me to take a step backwards in surprise. You're the one who put him in that spot. I should be bringing you in for making him work in unsafe conditions. Kid is clearly traumatized. That kid tried to drag me in there just now. He was trapped in a cave. Have you ever heard of swimmers drowning their saviors? People do crazy shit when their lives are at stake. It's not his fault he was put in that position. It's just a kid. I wanted to go on, to tell him how he tried to convince me to jump in there with him, but instead I relented. Matthew was staring right at us, looking at me with tears in his eyes.
I'm sorry, boss. I was scared. I was so scared. I didn't mean to pull you in there like that, really.
After a few moments of internal debate, I put on a small smile and said, Don't worry, Matthew. It's my fault for putting you in this position. I'm just glad you're okay. A look of pure rage crossed over his face for just an instant, and then was gone, as if it had never been there at all. Randy didn't notice it, or if he did, he never mentioned it.
Thanks, boss. Just a little banged up, that's all. I might need to take a day or two off from work.
Take as long as you need, kiddo. I'll be waiting for you when you get back, I said. But when I did, I was looking at the hole. Randy and I returned Matthew to his parents, and I should have felt relieved. But the whole time I had a feeling in my gut like a balloon full of cement was hardening inside. That feeling intensified when his parents brought him into an embrace, and I saw, just for a fleeting second, a look of distrust in his mother's eyes. But then it dissolved into happy tears.
You rescued our boy,
Matthew's father cried, pulling Randy into a hug.
How can we ever repay you?
I stood back, feeling somewhat ashamed, as if all of this had been my fault somehow. And maybe it was. I could have warned Matthew about the holes more forcefully. I could have mentioned them more often. I could have gone with him and not sent him alone, knowing the potential danger of that place.
Mr. Fleming helped too,
Matthew said, looking from me to his parents.
He's the one who actually pulled me out of that hole.
It was nothing, really, I started to say. But before I could, they were pulling me in for hugs and thanking me profusely. I should have felt better after that. But I didn't. I kept thinking of that fleeting look of distrust on his mother's face, and the old phrase I'd heard somewhere 100 times before. A mother knows best. After a couple days passed by, I ran into the pair of them again in the grocery store. Sharon and Art, I knew their names to be now. They had sent me a thank you card, which indicated them as such. But they did not look as happy to see me this time around.
Hey, how are you folks doing?
I asked when they made no attempt to greet me.
How's Matthew? I hope he's not too shaken up. I've been thinking about the poor kid. Spending a night in a hole in the ground can't be too much fun.
He's doing great, Matthew's mom said, with a big grin on her face that didn't quite fit the occasion. We're all doing great. Art gave her a disturbed look, then returned his gaze to me, shaking his head minutely. It took me a few seconds to clue into what was happening, but eventually I returned Sharon's smile and responded.
Oh, that's great to hear. I'm happy he's doing better. He was pretty shaken up.
She cocked her head slightly, like someone desperately trying to understand a lesser species. She spoke again, in short, clipped sentences.
He's been better. Ever since. Coming back. Up from that hole. She giggled. It makes me think we should all try it.
Her teeth were all showing, and she smiled so wide it must have hurt her face. I tried not to look at Art, knowing I would have to speak to him privately, without her around.
Okay, good to know. I'll let you folks go. Thanks for the update, I said, giving one last meaningful look at Art. Come by. For dinner sometime, Sharon called after me. Any night. Is fine. I made a point of going to visit the restroom a minute later, and Art followed after me. As soon as he was inside, I grabbed him by his shoulders and spoke directly into his face. What the hell was all that about? I asked, feeling that sinking sensation in my gut again. What's wrong with her? Art looked at me for a few seconds before shaking his head, as if coming out of a daydream. Sorry. She's been acting a bit strange the last day or so. And Matthew, he's been acting weird ever since he got back. I feel like I'm... He stopped himself, as if realizing he'd said too much. I'm sure it's nothing. Not nothing, but you know what I mean. Like, I don't know. It could be PTSD or some kind of trauma response. They'll be okay. It's just been a lot on both of them. What do you mean when you say Matthew has been acting weird? I asked, more than a little curious. It's probably nothing. You know how teenagers are. Just the stuff he says sometimes. He trailed off, and I had to prod him to keep him going. It might be important, I told him. Sighing, he went on reluctantly. I've caught him talking to himself alone in his room, using this weird, deep voice. He kept saying something about Garth Rock and the Void. I figured he was talking to some friend on the phone about a new band or something. But the whole thing made me feel uncomfortable. Just those words and that voice he was using. And then I could have sworn I heard Sharon say the same thing today. But it wasn't Garth Rock like I first thought. It was Groth Rock. And when I asked her about it, she just acted like she didn't hear me. But then I heard her saying it again on the ride over here. It was like it just slipped out. She was sitting beside me whispering, Groth Rock, Groth Rock, Groth Rock, over and over again. Like she was in a trance or something. My mind was racing, but I couldn't think of anything to do with that name. I had never heard it before in my life, and it wasn't ringing any bells. Maybe someone else would know more. Okay, thanks. Listen, I gotta go, but keep me up to date with any, new developments. Be careful, I said, running off and leaving my cart behind in the store. Be careful. I had repeated myself, but I wasn't entirely sure what he needed to be careful of. Big black holes in the ground? Yes, but also something else. Maybe more than one thing. Maybe his own wife and son, who had been somehow changed into vessels of this Groth Rock. The name wasn't familiar, but I had a feeling it was important. My cell phone rang in my pocket, making me jump, and I answered it quickly. It was one of my customers, and what they asked made my skin crawl with sudden concern. When are you going to come back and finish that damn lawn? It's been sitting there half mowed for days. I got in my car and drove. When I got to the house, the old woman who lived there came to the front door to greet me, and to yell at me. Again, she wasn't happy that the lawn had been left half mowed. Sorry, I said, in a hurry to get back there. I'll get it fixed up for you today. The kid I had working for me had a bit of an accident. Oh no, I hope he didn't fall into one of those holes. They've been popping up all over. Those big millipedes are such pests. I hope he's alright. Me too, I muttered under my breath, running into the backyard. My heart rate picked up when I saw the lawnmower sitting there, just as it had been at the other house. The grass was cut short leading up to it, and there was a hole hidden in a low point in the grass, just buried enough in the long stuff so that someone would step right into it if they weren't paying attention. Help! I heard a voice cry weakly from the darkness. Someone there? Approaching the edge of the hole, I couldn't even feel my legs. This all felt like a dream. Not real. Matthew? I croaked. Is that you? Yes. Please, get me out of here. Please. Been trapped down here for days. I'm so thirsty.
His cries for help were so genuine and so desperate that I was reaching my hand down there a second later to pull him out. And as I did, I heard voices whispering in that darkness. Whispers in low, ancient voices. But one word was discernible among them. Grothrock. I returned this new Matthew to his parents, hoping to speak to Art again. I wanted to know how this was possible. Had the previous boy we saved been an imposter? A shapeshifter or a body snatcher? In Hollow's End, any of those things could be possible. We have far stranger things living in this town, after all. But Art wasn't available when Sharon answered the door. "Hi, Sharon," I whispered, frozen in fear looking at her face. I wasn't sure what to say anymore. I didn't know what to do. Nothing was turning out how I had imagined it. Grinning, she took this new Matthew by the hand and pulled him inside. The two of them smiled at me, showing plenty of teeth as the door closed in my face. When I looked up, I saw Art and the other Matthew on the second floor, smiling wide and waving at me through a front window. I got in my car and drove from that place as fast as I could. But now, I don't know what to do. I don't know who to turn to. Those holes have been popping up everywhere. They're all over town. And every day there are more of them. Which means anyone could have fallen down one. Anyone could have been turned. Anyone in town could be a vessel of that darkness, that abyss. I've learned that the hollow blackness beneath Hollow's End has a name. Grothrock. And whatever that thing is, it's waking up. And it's taking over this town. Somehow we need to stop it. I only wish I knew who I could trust to help join me in this fight. Are you new to Hollow's End? Well, if you are, you may just want to check out the Hollow's End playlist, which will be showing up on your screen at the end of this video. Within that thing, you'll find the answers which you seek. Or maybe not. What do I know? Well, I guess one thing I do know for sure is who I want to thank for helping make this episode possible. The real-life citizens of Hollow's End. If you want to help support the channel and become a citizen of Hollow's End yourself, check out the Jordan Grupe Horror Patreon page and become a featured character, just like these fine folks. So head on over to patreon.com/Jordan Grupe Horror to see all the exclusive content and bonus videos that are over there. Or click the join button to become a channel member, and you'll get early access and bonus videos. Finally, if you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, comment, all that jazz. And if you really loved it, maybe share it with somebody else who you really want to torment. It really does help out a lot. Alright everybody, that's it for today's episode of Hollow's End. See you next time.